Hello, Doron Gold. I have with me here today. How are you, Doron?
Great. Thank you for having me, Maya.
I'm very happy to finally meet you. I've been seeing you a lot on Twitter or X now, as we call it, and it's your tweets are definitely very entertaining, funny, and informative, and it's very nice to have you here as a guest. And today I would like to talk to you about what you do because you do have a very interesting practice. So I wanted to start by asking you maybe, Doron, if you can tell us what is it that you do? I know you're a psychotherapist, but formerly you were a lawyer, practicing a lawyer in family and civil. So if you can tell us a little bit about your practice as a lawyer, the transition, how you changed your practice from being a lawyer into psychotherapy, just so we can start with that background.
Of course. So first of all, thank you for having me. It's an honor. The history is, and the older I get, the longer a history it gets. I graduated from Osgoode Hall Law School in 1994, at a time when I went to law school, not necessarily because I'd always wanted to be a lawyer, but because it seemed like the thing to do at the time. And I articled at an insurance defense firm. I worked in various places in the late 90s, doing various things until I settled in on primarily family law. I did some construction law, I did a little bit of refugee too in one spot. But family kind of spoke to me in a way that other areas of law did not. For someone who wasn't born to be a lawyer, for someone who didn't dream about it and didn't used to watch lawyer shows thinking that could be me, uh, what I found in family was something that I eventually started calling pseudo social work. I found a place where I could help people, particularly vulnerable people. I did a lot of legal aid certificates. I did a lot of work for a couple of women's shelters in Richmond Hill, Ontario, and that I found fulfilling because it felt like I could bring to bear not just legal expertise and knowing Section C3 or whatever of the Child and Family Services Act. I could bring to bear my emotional intelligence, my interest in human beings, my interest in vulnerable human beings who were otherwise not supported by anyone else, who needed someone to help them. That was very fulfilling to me. And so that was the work I ended up doing for the most part towards the end of my legal career. And it may seem like it doesn't make sense to say it was fulfilling and I ended the legal career. And it's because as much as I found work that I did like doing, it never entirely meshed with who I was. I was and remain not particularly inclined towards fighting and arguing. Um, I am an introvert. I like calm and evenness and going into court and going at each other. And let me tell you that the family courts in the early 2000s were not peaceful places. I suspect they're still not. Especially in bigger cities. It's better in smaller communities, but in places like Brampton and Newmarket, where I
Mm-hmm.
did my primary practice, it was unpleasant a lot of the time. And some people really enjoy that to and fro. I don't know that I ever did. I liked being an advocate and I liked persuasion and I liked some of the process, but I didn't really like the incivility. And I, I was called to do something else, primarily, as is the case for a lot of people, not so much because I was moving towards something else, but because I was moving away from law.
Okay.
It was becoming very clear to me that law was not going to be a place I want to spend the rest of my life. And so I thought about what else I could do. I was attracted to the idea of becoming a psychotherapist, a counselor, but it felt to me at that point I was coming on 40 years old, and it felt to me a little bit like, am I going to have to go back to school for years to get accredited to become a therapist? I don't think I can do that. So I decided to become a personal coach. I trained with a very good organization, learned a lot, became accredited, and started a personal coaching practice in early 2006, which is when I left my law practice, much to the chagrin of my mother, and uh, started to, advertise myself and seek business. I was trying to build a business as an entrepreneur. And one of the places I called was the lawyer assistance program that existed at the time called OLAP. And they talked to me, they had me come in. They ended up not sending me any clients, but they did call me 2 or 3 months later and say, would you like to come work here part-time as a case manager? And I thought, working with lawyers, helping them through difficult times, even though I'm not the counselor, I can still be supportive in terms of the kind of work I
Mhm.
do with them, and I can help direct them to services that are available to them. So I did that, and a part-time job turned into a full-time job. A full-time job turned into me uh, deciding that I want to upgrade my skills. And so I signed up for a working professionals master's of social work through University of Windsor that had a cohort near my office in Mississauga at the time. And over 2.5 years, I did a master's of social work, which led me to be accredited as a therapist just in time for the Law Society to switch their funding from OLAP to the new member assistance program, which hired me. And from there, I did not only counseling, but a lot of what I had done previously as well, which was a lot of psychoeducation, talks in the community, um, educating them not only about the program, but about mental health topics and addiction topics generally. And that's what I've been doing since. Recently, in January, I went out on my own in private practice, and I've been there since then.
Nice. And Doron, around which year of practice did you have that switch? Was it after 5 years, 10 years?
About 10 years. I was called in 96 and I ceased practice in 2006.
And that's almost like a radical change in your career, right?
Oh, yeah.
It's a very brave step. If you can maybe just talk a little bit about that, because the reason why I'm asking that is that we often see lawyers who, after a few years of practice, they start to wonder and question if law is really what they want to continue doing. Not necessarily, maybe it was good for them at the beginning, but then it no longer suits what they want or what they're looking for. But there's always this fear of, well, is it too late for me to start over? So 10 years, that's, a
Mm-hmm.
considerable amount of time. You can become a certified specialist by
Mm-hmm.
that time. So maybe if you can tell us a little bit more about that time and the decision making, the process, what was going through your head? Were you afraid of going into something completely
Terrified.
new? Yeah,
I was
I can
terrified.
imagine.
Listen, and this is sometimes useful for me when I'm working with people who are thinking about what they're going to do with their career, because
Yeah.
I went through that process, the deliberative process of I'm a lawyer, but I'm not sure I want to be a lawyer. But maybe it's just that I need to try harder, or maybe it's that I'm not smart enough and I should buck up my education, or maybe it's that I'm just working in the wrong area of law, or maybe I'm working in
Yeah.
the wrong venue. I should work in big law. I should work in a government office. I should work in a legal aid clinic. I should be in
Mhm.
academia. There are lots of things within law that a person can do.
Mhm.
And so there's lots of reasons why a person might feel that the place they're at is not a good fit for them. That shouldn't necessarily lead them to just decide to not be lawyers at all. For some people like me, that ultimately was the right decision. But it's not always the right decision. Sometimes people can be soured on law simply by the first job they have after they're called to the bar, where they work for an abusive senior partner who makes them feel miserable. And they think, well, if this is law, I don't want any part of it.
Yeah.
It's not what law is, it's what law is in
Mhm.
certain places, but they don't know that. So part of the perspective I help them gain is what got you in, what made you interested in law, what of the work that you're doing now still resonates for you, what doesn't, and is there something within the legal profession that you might be able to do that will satisfy the things that your values say are important to you and let go of the things that aren't. In my case, having done a few things, I had worked through all the various permutations of how I might practice law and came to a conclusion at that point. I gave it a good college try. I don't want to do this anymore. But even then, there's lots of people who will say to you, why wouldn't you want to be a lawyer? You know, I mentioned my mom, who is a wonderful human being, and was a wonderful mom and still is. Uh, when I called my mom and said, I quit my job today, I can't do law anymore. I said, it's killing me. Can't do it anymore. My mother, my saintly mother said, go back and beg for your job back. And I thought, did you not hear the part about how it's killing me? She said,
Yeah.
well, you worked so hard to get that degree and to gain this standing in the profession, and it's a very respected profession and people admire you, and you can make a good living, and you know you have a mortgage to pay, you need the stability and
Yeah.
all the things a mother will worry about. But it's pervasive throughout society, the idea that if you're a lawyer, why wouldn't you want to be a lawyer? Isn't it great to be a lawyer? Well, it is for the people for whom it's great.
Hmm.
It really isn't for the people for whom it isn't.
Yeah.
And the hard thing for people is to figure out, why am I unhappy? Is it law itself? Is it my boss? Is it the fact that I'm practicing patent and trademarks and I always wanted to be a criminal lawyer? There's all kinds of reasons why a person might be unhappy that don't lead one to think I should just no longer be a lawyer. And occasionally there are really good reasons to say, you know what? No, I don't think law is for me. Best encapsulation of this phenomenon is a quote from Albert Einstein, where he said that everyone is a genius, but if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will think it's stupid, or it will live its life thinking that it's stupid. And the idea is there's a lot of people in law, there are a lot of fish trying to climb trees. And when you tell them maybe you should go find some water more suited to you, their answer will be, I don't quit. I'm not a
Yeah.
quitter. I don't fail. I'm going to slay this dragon. I'm going to figure out how to like this. And I don't, who says I have to like my work?
But on this point, though, Doran, how do you know that what you're going through, like if you're going through this phase of questioning and you're starting to have doubts as to whether you want to still practice law or not, how do you know that it's because you're just discouraged and you shouldn't quit, or that it's really because you're not suited for this and you should actually leave and do something else?
I wish I had a definitive answer for you. It's a
Okay.
very complex question because for each person it's different.
Mhm.
And so, um, uh, my advice for people, and it really, I try not to advise because it really is individualized, but I don't encourage people to just say, never mind law, I'll go do something else, because sometimes they're just soured on
Yeah.
law by virtue of the place they're working.
Mhm.
And there are other workplaces. It's just when you're new in law, you only know what's in front of you. And if that's the only experience you have, you will assume it's that way everywhere. And it really isn't.
Yeah.
So for some people, I will suggest to them, uh, assess first of all if there are things about your work you like, and then see if you could do that elsewhere.
Mhm.
One thing that I have found is a theme in my work with lawyers in particular is a lot of them are hesitant to make a change, even if they're profoundly unhappy, because they think it'll be bad for their resume. They think it'll look bad on them. They won't get a they won't get a recommendation letter, whatever their thoughts are.
But it's also because people don't, isn't it also because people just are afraid of change? Sometimes people just want to stick to what they know. It's better than
What if the
discovering
grass
some.
is not greener on the other side?
Right,
What if it's even
exactly.
worse in a new place?
Yeah.
And so what I found over the years is often what we will discuss in a therapeutic environment is simply, you have choice. No choices you make are permanent choices. Even if you leave a job and go somewhere else, that somewhere else doesn't have to be the perfect choice either. It's just movement.
Mhm.
I think of it as bending an arc. You know, Martin Luther King said that the arc of the moral universe is long, it bends towards justice.
Yeah.
I've moved that around a little bit to say that the arc of a legal career is long and it bends towards fulfillment. It doesn't have to start there. It usually doesn't. Often, some people just take first job that they can get out of their call to get going. Some
Right.
people will start somewhere where they like and then they realize it's not for them. Um, so they're not they're not on a straight line that has to be perfect. They're bending the arc in the direction of a really nice landing place where they fit, where they're enjoying the work, not every day, but where they feel like this is good work. This is what I'm here to
Yeah.
do. And I like the clients I work for and I like the people I work with and I make a fair living at it and I can pay my bills and I feel respected. That can take time to get to, particularly since when people start out as lawyers, they don't always even know what they like because they haven't done anything yet.
Right.
I found family law because in the office I was working, an institutional client who was giving us lots of construction work fired us, and I needed to find work really quick. And one of the other guys in the office was doing legal aid family work, and I got on the panel and I started doing family work and found, whoa, this is more who I am. I didn't know that. In fact, I will tell you, and forgive me as a criminal lawyer, when I left law school, I was intent on one thing. which was I will never be a criminal lawyer or a family lawyer. Those were the two areas I thought, here's what I called it. And forgive me, all of your listeners. I, in my youth, thought criminal lawyers and family lawyers uh, um, are leeches on the misfortune of others. In their worst moments, they take advantage and jump in and poor dear, I'll help you. That was my young, not particularly informed view of it, until I then started doing actual family law and thought, wow, this is really important work. These people really need help and I can give it. And I suspect criminal lawyers feel the same way.
It's even more important, right? Because their
Yeah, it's liberty.
liberty is,
Yeah.
yeah. But just going back a bit on your mom, though, does she approve now of your choice of working as a
Oh, she's
psychotherapist, or
fine
does
now.
she? Yeah, okay, so
She's
I hope
fine.
she still
She
doesn't
got her. It
blame
was
you
that
for.
initial terror
Yeah,
of what will her son do? He's making a huge mistake.
yeah.
But once she saw that I was okay and I was making a living, and maybe she read an article I wrote every once in a while and thought, people read these? You write these? People publish these? She's fine now. It took a
So
while though.
Doron, well, I'm glad that she is because I mean, it seems like you really found your place and you found what you are meant to be doing, and you seem to be very happy about psychotherapy. But I wanted to ask you because you did mention that you've been doing, especially at the beginning, and you still are working with the lawyer member assistance program. So you have a lot of lawyers who are clients, and I guess also criminal lawyers as well.
Mhm. Just to
And
clarify,
I,
by the way, I worked with them until this past January,
Mhm.
and I've been on my own since then.
Okay, yes. But you still have client lawyers
Oh
who
yeah,
are clients.
absolutely.
And maybe if you can tell us a bit about the reasons why lawyers would want to seek psychotherapy.
So I will start with a general comment, which is because they're people, and because people need compassion, they need perspective, they need insight, and they need to sometimes not be alone with some of their distress.
Mhm.
And so that's true of all people. Um, Lawyers have a particular need, and it's a generalization, and it's not true of every lawyer, but there has been an observed lawyer personality which involves things like being autonomous and being intelligent and being diligent, also being perfectionistic,
Yeah.
which some people think is an attribute, and I would assert to you is absolutely not. Um, uh, Being very self-judging, being very inclined towards isolation
Mhm.
and not exposing too much vulnerability. So you take a person who is working in a job that demands enormous hours of them, that demands, you know, uh, really adversarial interactions with opposing counsel, that wear them out. That involves the intensity of, let's say, trying to protect the liberty of my client. That's a lot of weight to carry for a professional. Um, I remember the weight I used to carry in arguing motions around custody and access. I mean, where are these children going to live primarily? That was a lot of pressure. It's intense. Am I doing a good job? Am I smart enough? When I was early in my career, like really early, someone would come and talk to me and ask me for help and tell me their story. And in my head, I'm thinking, wow, you need a lawyer. I didn't think I was up to it. They needed to hire an actual professional, right? I know lawyers of a number of years of experience who still sometimes feel that way. Imposter syndrome is just
Right.
rampant. Sometimes it's rampant because they are kind of perfectionistic and they have a notion of what it takes to be good, and their notion of excellence is actually perfection, which for most humans is impossible, but they keep chasing it. So they're never good enough. So they're always distressed and they're always ashamed. And so they don't want to tell anyone. And they don't want anyone to know that they feel that way, that they are in fact failing in their minds. So that person who's judging themselves harshly, who's not talking to anyone about it because they're ashamed, who is feeling worse and worse and worse, and feeling the pressure of maybe I'm not up to this. I hope I can handle this next matter. Then they talk to a therapist, and the therapist's message is likely going to be, that sounds really hard. A lot of people in your position feel that way. And approaching things from a perfectionistic lens will often lead a person to perpetual unhappiness because you'll never be enough. And you'll always wonder if there's more you could do.
Mhm.
Um, and so that inner conversation is very corrosive to a person, because there's these critical voices in their heads that are criticizing them and tell them to stop whining and don't be so weak and you're failing. And if they're not talking to anyone, that those voices in their head are their truth. Getting a perspective from someone who is professional, who's compassionate, who's non-judgmental, changes the game for a lot of people, because they get permission to be human beings, to be vulnerable without it meaning that they're weak or failing. It really does change the game for a lot of people. So that's one way that the pressure of workload and client demands and keeping up with the law in a certain area and making a living and keeping a law office running, if you're a sole practitioner, for instance, so many demands, so much pressure, and not talking to anyone about it. There's no spigot to let out pressure.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, if I want to talk and focus a little bit more on criminal lawyers in particular, because most of our listeners are criminal lawyers, how would you say, first of all, do you encourage them to seek psychotherapy and to start having psychotherapy sessions? And how would that assist them in their practice as criminal lawyers in particular, as opposed to lawyers in general?
So first of all, I would, like anyone else, I would encourage them, if it's appropriate, to seek some help. It's not that everyone needs psychotherapy. It's that psychotherapy is helpful for a lot more people than think they would benefit from it. Psychotherapy is not just for people who are desperate, who have major depressive disorder and can't get out of bed, and
Mm-hmm.
that's not it. It's very useful for that, but it's also useful for just feeling out of sorts, for just feeling like you're unhappy a lot of the time, or that your anxiety pops up a lot. You have the occasional anxiety attack, panic attack, and you don't know why. And it's for managing life. It's not for managing crisis necessarily, although it can be useful for that too. It's just that it doesn't have to be a crisis for you to seek out help. um, Criminal lawyers are like many others in terms of struggling with things like workload and struggling with things like incivility of opposing counsel, although, as I mentioned to you earlier, I don't find it as much the case with the criminal bar than, let's say, the family bar or the civil litigation bar, where counsel are at each other.
Mm-hmm.
um, so there's less of that, but there's still that issue. So workload is an issue. A lot of sole practitioners in the criminal bar trying to make a living, and it's not always easy to make a living. It's not always easy to deal with Legal Aid Ontario and get
Yeah.
paid. I know some lawyers who also have trouble billing. They just can't bring themselves to get the bills out, even though there is an entity there waiting to pay them, although it'll take them a while. Um, there's a lot of challenges around this. It just feels like a block to them to just do the
Yeah.
billings, maybe because it's administrative or because they don't want to then engage with LAO. Um, so these are some challenges. Some of the very specific challenges that affect criminal lawyers can be the kind of subject matter that they're dealing with. The concept of vicarious trauma, compassion fatigue. Um, these are areas where you're exposed to high needs clients, you're exposed to disturbing images, sounds. For instance, back in 1996, 95, when I was an articling student, I articled in the firm that represented the French and Mahaffey families during the Bernardo trial.
Mm-hmm.
So I have distinct memories of going to 361 University to deliver papers, looking in, and there's the trial going on in there. And I remember things like the videotape, the famous awful videotape, sitting in the lawyer's office on his chair, and thinking to myself, to do his job properly, he has to watch that probably more than
Mm-hmm.
once. How does he do that? That stuff doesn't leave your brain.
Right.
Once you see that, you can't unsee it. The idea of vicarious trauma, one of the hallmarks of it is that it can change the way you see the world. It can make you more cynical about other human beings. It can skew your view of what can happen to people, how people handle things. It can make you put up a wall to distance yourself from feelings, because the feelings are just too painful and intense. So that can really affect criminal lawyers. It can affect also family lawyers, child protection lawyers, refugee lawyers. Criminal lawyers can really deal with those things. My first exposure was the Bernardo trial in
Mm-hmm.
that case. And a lot of them, including Crowns, just kind of suck it up and deal. They just they just go through it, and then the trial's over, and then here's another file. Go do this trial. Another set of difficult facts, another terrible story, another set of horrific images. And they're not doing anything to support themselves. Their offices are often not doing anything to support them when there are particularly challenging matters in front of them. And what therapy can do is help them to process some of the things that they're seeing, hearing, dealing with, some of the clients that they're dealing with, some of the subject matter. It if I'm going to boil it down, I'm going to say the therapy allows them to be themselves without any judgment, without any shame. They get to feel their feelings and not judge them. Where to other people, being horrified by something and having it, sit with them all evening afterwards, or maybe for more than just an evening, they might be ashamed of it, not want to tell anyone that they were affected by it. Of course they're affected by it. These are terrible things that some people are exposed to. They need a place to work through those feelings, to
Yeah.
work through the impact it can have on you. And that psychotherapy is a place where that can happen.
And how does a psychotherapy session, or what does it look like? So what exactly happens when someone goes to see you, Doron, in a session?
So interestingly enough, because I do now exclusively video or telephone sessions, it would look a little like this.
Okay.
Except there wouldn't be labels. I would be not doing it on Zoom, but on a secure platform.
Mhm.
But it would be as though you're sitting in the room with someone and you're creating a space that is entirely for that person and about that person, a place where they get to be themselves completely and unapologetically. There is nothing they can say to me short of, suggesting they will harm themselves or someone else, or that a child is in some peril. There's nothing they can say to me that's going to make me not want to help them. So this is a place where they get to take all those feelings and shames and fears and concerns in their head that no one should know about them, and maybe talk about them, and realize that the person they're talking to is going to support them and validate their feelings and validate their reactions, and maybe offer them tools. The key in psychotherapy is, in the way I learned it and in the way I've practiced it, is not which modality is applied. Some people do cognitive behavioral therapy, some people do narrative therapy, some people do psychodynamic therapy. To me, and I think I've seen it validated clinically, the significant majority of impact that psychotherapy has on a person is the relationship with the therapist. Do they
Mhm.
feel safe? Do they feel
Yeah.
seen? Do they feel supported? Do they feel understood and validated and not judged? If they feel comfortable that the person they're talking to is a safe person to talk to, will let them feel their feelings and not judge them for it, will not scold them, will not throw a bunch of opinions at them and tell them what to do the way lawyers do, because that's their job, but will support and listen and understand and mirror and say back to them so they can confirm, this is what I heard, and that sounds like it was really difficult for you. Um, what did you think of that? How did that feel? That can be a new experience for some people. The psychotherapy environment is this enclosed cocoon where just these two people, or if it's couples therapy, three people, or if it's family
Yeah.
therapy, it can be more, where those people can talk about anything. I kind of liken it to the solicitor client privilege, where the criminal client can come in and talk freely because this is a safe place to talk about everything. Whatever the criminal lawyer wants to or doesn't want to know, they can set that up between them. But the solicitor client privilege protects the client from not being able to share everything they need to share to get a proper defense.
And is there advice that you give them, or like, do you give them any strategies on how to deal with certain types of situations, or is it just them listening and just trying to get them to talk and express what's going on with them?
So I don't presume to give advice because that is presumptuous. That said, it will not surprise you that as a former lawyer, um, I don't shy away from suggesting things, tossing
Mhm.
things around, giving perspectives. And what I have found, and I'm just going to say that for me, a lot of the clients I work with, having worked with therapists who are much more in the vein of how did that make you feel? Tell me more about that. Very much open ended, letting the client do most of the talking. which in my case, most clients do most of the talking also. That's usually the way it should be.
Yeah.
But a lot of the clients like affirmative responses. They like ideas thrown around. They
Hmm.
like directness. I mean, lawyering taught me a lot about how to be a good therapist. It taught me boundaries, how not to become my client's case, not to
Hmm.
be immersed in it so that when I get off of a session with a client, I'm laying in bed thinking about them for hours. No, I have to move on to the next thing. I have to have that professional distance while at the same time, while I'm with them, being right with them, completely empathetic and with no barriers whatsoever. But it taught me boundaries, it taught me assertiveness. Lawyering is really good. Law school, but more practice, especially as a litigator, teaches you assertiveness to speak up. So having dealt with family law clients and had to often tell them things they didn't want to hear, like maybe your litigation will not be served by us trying to destroy the other party. Um, it allows me as a therapist to sometimes, I it's a strange term. I hope no one bothered by it. I've come to call it the slap and tickle. It basically is I am telling them a hard truth, but because we've built up rapport and trust, I say it in a way that they welcome it. They want to get that feedback. They want honesty. They don't want me to just tell them what they want to hear. I will have, for instance, a client talking to me about a dispute with their spouse, and I'm listening to it and I'm hearing the way they talk about the way they talk to their spouse. And I'll gauge whether they're open to this, but I may give them feedback about how do you think it felt for your spouse to hear you say it that way? Now, some people might think, I thought you were on my side. I am on your side. I want this to work. I want you to have good outcomes. So let's be really honest about what works and what's the best way to proceed. My experience is clients really appreciate that as long as they feel like you're coming from a good place, that you do have their best interest at heart, that you're acting in good faith. They want to hear truth. They want to really get to what's really going to be effective, whether it's in relationships, whether it's at work, whether it's the way they treat themselves. Frankly, I will often confront clients on the language they use to describe themselves. They throw around words like stupid and loser. I mean, I think those are violent words. Imagine if the conversation in your head is fraught with language like that.
Yeah.
How are you going to feel on a day-to-day basis? It's like indoctrination in how awful a person you are, and you can't escape it. And you probably don't notice that you're even using those words until someone says, um, "That's a harsh word to use for yourself. I think you deserve more grace than that."
And so it seems, Doran, like a lot of the issues are also are from people not being aware or conscious of things that they're doing that could actually be harmful to them. So it seems like you just make them become aware of many of the things that they're doing that are wrong, that they don't even realize that they're doing what they're doing is wrong, right?
A lot of therapy is that, depending on, what the issue is, but a lot of times it's things like, so I mentioned perfectionism. A lot of lawyers will deny being perfectionists,
Yeah.
primarily because they will say that they're not perfect enough to be allowed to call themselves perfectionists, um, which is proof that they're perfectionists. Uh, but I once had a lawyer say to me, a Bay Street partner say to me, um, perfectionism is what got me here. At which point I said, you mean on a stress leave talking to a therapist? They didn't realize that the thing that was pushing them forward, that made them never miss a thing and always be anxious about what they're missing and reading it over 3 or 4 times
Yeah.
and having people check it and double check it and laying up at night wondering, is that the wording I want to use tomorrow morning in court? And that constant, relentless pursuit of perfection, which is impossible to attain in law practice generally, um, wears them out, but they think it is the right thing to do. Now, the delineation I often offer is don't pursue perfection, pursue excellence. Your clients want you to be excellent. Your clients want you to work hard. They want you to focus. They want you to be diligent. They want you to not leave any stone unturned. They absolutely want you to work really hard and apply your talent and your expertise. They don't expect you to turn off everything else, or maybe they do, but they shouldn't. Turn off everything else in your life and focus on every hour of the day on serving them. Um, so perfectionism is one of the examples of people who don't even realize they're doing it or think it's a good thing.
Mm.
One of the other pieces that comes out a lot, which is sort of a psychodynamic element of this, is um, as as stereotypical as this might seem for a therapist, a lot of adult behavior is rooted in childhood adverse experiences, abuse, neglect, bullying, um, so many different experiences people have in childhood that lead them in childhood to uh, to find strategies for coping. An 8-year-old, a 10-year-old dealing with bullying or with a father who drinks too much and gets angry or maybe even violent, and that child doesn't know what to do with that. In fact, the child is really confused. The child tries to figure out what it's about. They will often conclude it must be my fault, because to a child, they are the center of the universe. Bad things are happening around them. There's probably something that they're doing, which leads them to feel like they need to please people in order to keep bad things from happening. They need to maybe be perfect, get good marks in order to keep bad things from happening. It's as though they have internalized that it's their fault and that it's up to them to make it better, which is a terrible thing for a child to carry. Imagine if an adult takes that childhood narrative of self-blame and then continues to want to please people in adulthood, continues to never stop trying to be better and better and better, or attain more and more and more, get higher jobs, higher paying jobs, because that will be protective. Lots and lots of adult behavior is rooted in childhood trauma, adverse experiences, and because people either don't know that that's why or don't want to think about it that way because it feels like, why am I blaming my parents? My parents are great people. They did the best they could. I'm responsible for what's happening to me. Yes, that's true. You are ultimately responsible for yourself. One of the points that I find useful for people in that situation is, let's stipulate that your parents are good people who did the best they could with what they knew, other than maybe a few who really weren't. But let's just say your parents are good people. They
Yeah.
worked as hard as they could. They really wanted what was best for you. They taught me to always get an A+, or they won't be loving towards me, because their job was to squeeze the potential out of me. That's what a good parent does. Okay, so let's say your parents, their intentions were pristine. What was the impact on the child? You can look back at that child without any blame on the parents. You can blame if you want. Sometimes blame is appropriate, but let's say blame is not the point. The point is the child went through some stuff that the child didn't know how to handle, and the child tried to figure out how to survive with very little experience, with a growing brain, um, and that child developed strategies that won't necessarily work very effectively in adulthood, like avoidance, like pure autonomy, never ask for help ever. It's few lawyers like that.
Yeah.
So opening people up to the exploration of where they learned to do certain things, where they learned that anxiety is a good thing because it keeps you on your toes, it can be helpful.
Definitely. And Doron, I also wanted to ask you maybe, and I know I'm mindful of your time, but maybe just one last question that I wanted to ask you as well. I mean, there are still, I mean, I think now therapy and psychotherapy is a little bit, I mean, it's better viewed than it used to be before, but there are still some stigma
Mhm.
surrounding psychotherapy. So, what are some of the things that you may say just to change people's opinions about psychotherapy and encourage them to actually seek that assistance because we might actually need help?
Mhm. Um, the truth is that a person needs to be ready to shed, or at least take a chance on shedding the stigma. Stigma is powerful. Lawyers are afraid that colleagues will find out that they're struggling. Lawyers are afraid that the
Or
law
clients.
society will find out,
Yeah.
or clients will find out.
Yeah.
And so that's a tough hill. That's why the confidentiality of the therapeutic relationship is so important.
Mm.
Even when I worked for the lawyer assistance program, and it's still true for them, they have a carve out in the rules of professional conduct that prevents them from ever being called to testify at a law society hearing, at a discipline hearing, because there needs to be a place where lawyers can go to talk about this stuff. And so I often will say to people, try a session. If you don't feel comfortable, no one will know. It's just you and me.
Yeah.
So let's have a conversation, see if there's something in there that you might find useful. Often they're surprised that it's not as complicated as they thought, that it's not as uncomfortable as they thought it would be. Because listen, that self-judging person is walking around thinking that their self-judgment is the truth. And they're not talking to anyone about it, so they have no counter argument. When you suggest to them go talk to someone about it, they will often think, well, that person's just going to tell me what I already know about myself, which is that I'm weak. Why would I subject myself to that? I'm just going to keep it to myself. When they do go to therapy, or when they speak to a peer support person or something like that, and that person is kind and compassionate and non-judgmental, it's a little jarring. It's not the answer they expected. They expected to be rebuked, to have their own self-image confirmed, and instead they get someone saying, give yourself a break. You're doing the best you
Yeah.
can. That's an entree to further work, because now they're not as afraid of it anymore. There's actually a nice feeling associated with it, even though for some people it doesn't feel right to be nice to
Yeah.
themselves.
That's very nice. So thank you so much, Doron, for this wonderful interview. I mean, I definitely learned a lot about psychotherapy, and I'm really very interested even more now in what you do. And you seem like your tone is very calming and soothing. So I guess your clients really enjoy your sessions. So thank you so much for taking the time. And I'm very happy that I finally got to meet you. And maybe just before we end this interview, where can people find you if they're interested in
Mm-hmm.
knowing more about what you do? I know you're on Twitter or X, but where else can they find you if they want to get in touch with you?
I have a website. I need to update it, but I have a website, thelawyertherapist.ca or dorongold.com. The easiest way to reach me is just to write me at thelawyertherapist@gmail.com, thelawyertherapist@gmail.com, and I'll answer any question anyone has. I'm very honored to do this. I've always liked your demeanor on Twitter. I like kind people. It's just a thing. So when Twitter is full of people who aren't nice to each other, and then people like Maya come along and say nice things to other people, it's like, that's a good person. So thank you for having me. I'm really honored by it.
Well, I'm very honored to have you as a guest, and I'm very happy that I finally got up to chat with you. And I hope one day we'll meet in person. And who knows, maybe I will be one of your clients as well. So, yes. Thank you so much, Doron. And it was
My
a
pleasure.
pleasure to chat with you today.
Be well.